Do I need to point this to a particular direction? Okay. Systems approach simply means that Namibia's education sector does not operate in a vacuum. The country has in 2006 formulated a very robust framework of accountability called the National Standards and Performance Indicators, which I'm pretty sure many of you know that at the time was hailed as one of the most robust and progressive in the world. In addition to that, in the last couple of years, the line ministries responsible for gender and education have also formulated the Early Integrated Childhood Development Framework, which aims to ensure that there is true continuity in education service delivery, which caters for a child from the moment of conception. The operating motto that guides the line ministries in this regard is what you see on the right side of my slide, which says, quality education is our shared responsibility. And to bring this principle to life, the ministry has introduced a program that I would like to draw your attention to, which is called the Social Accountability and School Governance Program. Without going into too many details, this program aims to foster constructive linkages between the school and the community. Because if we talk about education, we oftentimes talk about that triangle, which has the learner at its center, which has the teacher, and of course the parent or the wider community. And the Social Accountability Program has been tremendously successful in harnessing the potential of linking the school and situating it in its wider community. There is a study that I will mention later on that is included in your USB stick, where you can read a little bit more about the tenets and the tools and processes that social accountability is based upon. So in terms of the dimensions of analysis, there will be three big kind of pillars that I will be, or dimensions that I will be highlighting today. The first one is what we at UNICEF like to call the enabling environment, and this is not to use our own jargon, but I find that particularly helpful for this particular purpose, because enabling environment captures everything from legislative and policy framework, access to education, and most importantly, financing. So there is a very robust policy and legislative framework that captures and weaves together the enabling environment for the Namibian child. And I have to say, in that regard, Namibia can be very proud to have as we have heard even this morning, a very solid enabling environment. The challenge, as we have also heard from the Vice Chancellor this morning, is around implementation. And this is what the second pillar speaks to, the system strengthening. And perhaps the single most influential missing piece in the system strengthening part is data. Data is the foundation of information, and the information is the foundation of knowledge. A lot of effort has gone in the last 5 years to consolidate and harmonize the overall architecture and functionality of data systems in Namibia's education sector. Again, I will share with you various reports which will hopefully attest to that. In addition, the country has a robust school governance program, which is centered on the principles of social accountability, so I've already mentioned that. There is a strong emphasis on inclusive education. The government is very serious to ensure that no child is left behind, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. So learners with special learning needs are catered for in the enabling environment that the government has. The challenge, of course, as we know, is around implementation. And one of the studies that I will be talking about points to these challenges and has concrete recommendations that are actionable and that can rectify this problem. And lastly, what is, for me personally, perhaps one of the most promising avenues is the Integrated School Health and Safety Program. So here I have brought with me two training manuals, or two documents, one that speaks to school health and the other that speaks to school safety. So again, these are very good, very robust documents, but in addition to that, through the Social Accountability Program, the ministry has put in place a plan how to operationalize these programs and these strategies at the school level. And if you'd like, I can talk a little bit in more detail about that during the coffee break. But at this stage, I have to proceed to the last segment, which I think probably speaks most to the core agenda of this conference, which is the quality of teaching and learning. But you see, if these if these previous two pillars are not in place, then it is very difficult to achieve quality outcomes and educational attainment as we would want them to. In addition to that, we also have a policy framework that talks about the integration of ICT in education. And one particular study that I will conclude my session today with talks about the socio-economic determinants of learning. And I have to say in this regard, this is quite a pioneering approach where complex outcomes, and we know education is a very contested, very complex field, is linked to something even more complex, which is the socio-economic background. And the ministry hasn't shied away to try and scientifically look at the linkages between the two. So I will share just one slide on that particular issue. So these are the dimensions of analysis. And now very quickly, I will name the studies. There are 16 of them, so please bear with me. First, we have the survey report that talks about, or rather that the ministry has generated in the process of reviewing the Education Act. Probably you remember that some 4 years ago, the ministry has embarked upon the process of reviewing its education bill, number 16 of 2001. And the Speaker of the Parliament, after the consultative process was done, hailed it as the most consultatively reviewed act since Namibia gained independence. And the reason why he said that probably has to do with the fact that in this survey report, 11,000 people were consulted formally in a scientific way. People from the various corners of the education fraternity, including learners, teachers, parents, ministry officials, former ministers, current ministers, prime ministers, and so on. In addition to that, the ministry went to 28 towns, settlements, and villages across the country and directly consulted 2,000 people in town hall type events. And there was a massive online campaign and community-based campaign that consulted an additional 60,000 people. So in total, 70,000 people were consulted in one way or another in the process of reviewing the Education Act. I think this speaks not only to the commitment of the ministry, but perhaps more importantly to the commitment of society and the vested interest that people in Namibia have when it comes to education. So I would strongly encourage you to look through the outcomes of this survey report, which form the scientific basis for reviewing the Education Act. The second big piece of research that I want to draw your attention to is called Public Expenditure Review of the Basic Education Sector in Namibia. Oftentimes we speak about resources, but even more often we speak in anecdotal terms. For the first time now, the education sector has a very robust analytical document which can inform analysis of education finances. So this is an extremely rich document, and I will present only a couple of slides from this particular report. In terms of our life cycle approach, recently concluded was the cost of inaction study on early childhood development in Namibia, which was done by Interteam and the partners. We then have a human resources development plan and implementation strategy for Namibian basic education sector. And linked to that is the teacher incentive study. Probably most of you know that in Namibia we have what is called the bush allowance, which is meant to incentivize teachers to teach in remote areas. And there is a report from 2014 that speaks to the effectiveness and efficiency of this particular approach. Then there is a study that is called School Dropout and Out-of-School Children in Namibia, a very comprehensive study that canvasses on the supply side and on the demand side all the barriers in education and analyzes the push and the pull factors, push factors being those that keep children away from school or put them at risk of dropping out, and the pull factors that keep them in the school. And lastly, fresh off the press, I've received it just this morning, it's still in draft form, the school readiness study in pre-primary learners in Namibia, among pre-primary learners in Namibia. Again, this shows the commitment the government has in terms of prioritizing early learning. This report I didn't include on the stick because it needs to be released officially by the ministry. In terms of system strengthening, the data piece, is truly the connective tissue that brings together all these different knowledge management processes. And we have what is called the EMIS, or the Education Management Information System, and reports from 2015 to 2018. They are up to date, so the data is out there. We just need to start using them on a serious note. In addition to that, there is the study of positive deviant schools, which in 2017 won a reward, an international reward called Best of UNICEF Research Globally, and it is centered on the principles of social accountability. Another fascinating study that shows how schools that are disadvantaged, even in remote areas, that seemingly do not have the right resources, can still overcome the odds and perform well. I also mentioned the Inclusive Education Assessment Report, so that one is from 2018. And lastly, we have the Global Student-Based Health Survey that canvasses what we call health and safety barriers to education. And you will see in a little while why this particular report I've chosen to put in here. Lastly, the studies that talk about quality of teaching and learning. Currently underway are 3 linked studies that aim to canvas comprehensively all the trend outcomes, all the trends in learning outcomes in the Namibian education sector from 1992 to date for all the grades, for all the subjects. I repeat, all the grades and all the subjects. Again, this is quite unprecedented. And in addition to having this kind of information, what fascinates me personally is the fact that Namibia has the data to actually be able to produce such a report. When I speak to colleagues from UNICEF in Eastern and Southern Africa, let's say in a country like Mozambique or Somalia, their jaw drops when they hear the kind of data that we sit on. So Namibia truly is, in education terms, a gold mine when it comes to data. And again, the leadership of the ministry, thanks to the leadership of the ministry, this data is now actively being used to understand and uncover the deeper trends so that policy determination, planning, and decision-making can be made truly based on evidence. We have the ICT, or a whole movement in Namibia around meaningful integration of ICT in education. Through the support of UNESCO, the government has put in place the Kopano Forum, which I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with. So there are very promising practices that you can read about in this report called Mapping and Scoping Exercise to Support Integration of ICT in Education in Namibia. Again, a report from 2017. So as you can see, fresh reports with data that is really relevant and timely and that speaks to the situation on the ground and that is also culturally relevant. All right, so now I'm going to actually extract some of the key findings from all these various reports that I've mentioned. So the first one is around enabling environment. I'm not at liberty to share the provisions in the New Education Act until it is officially gazetted. But there is the issues paper which preceded the revision of the New Education Act, which defined the philosophy or the spirit in which the Act was revised. And there are 6 core principles of the New Education Act. The first one is equitable delivery of quality education. The second one is an enabling environment to eliminate gender and other forms of discrimination. The third one is strengthening systems. I've already spoken about that, but importantly, starting in early childhood. So we must not forget the foundational stage of learning. Active participation of all stakeholders. Unless the parent is on board, it is very difficult, as I'm sure you all know and agree, it is very difficult to achieve optimal learning outcomes. For the first time, the Education Act explicitly mentions 2 pioneering things. The first one is the need to have a robust and dynamic management of data and information on EMIS, and the other one is the Integrated School Health and Safety Program. This program aims to minimize and, where possible, remove health and safety barriers to education. Again, I don't think I need to convince you. If you imagine a girl called Ndapandula, she's in grade 7, she's somewhere in Ohangwena region, at the border with Angola. She may have been born HIV positive. Maybe the only meal that she has in a day is melted sugar on bread, which is an overload of carbohydrates. She walks 7.5 kilometers to school and 7.5 kilometers back. With these kinds of circumstances, how do we expect Ndapandula to perform well in algebra or geography or English? This is why the ministry is taking the integrated school health and safety program so seriously. We heard this morning the call from the learners themselves who said we want our schools to be safe, to be fenced, and to have a proper safety mechanism in place. That mechanism is indeed in place already, and it is here. And I encourage you to read it and to familiarize yourselves with it and to engage with it and to figure out ways how you can assist the ministry to operationalize it at the school level. Lastly, in terms of none of these programs obviously can work if they're not adequately funded for. So there is an innovative and cost-effective approach to public financing in education, which is informed by this pioneering study that I mentioned earlier around public expenditure review. All right, so in terms of key findings that are coming from these different reports, I've quoted the source here in below the graph. I'm not sure if you can see it. This graph, I will spend 1 or 2 minutes unpacking what is in there because it tells a fascinating story in terms of access to education in Namibia. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but I will guide you through it. On the x-axis, we have the level of education starting from no education, grade 1 up until grade 12, and then we have postgraduate degrees, diplomas, degrees, honors, and master's degree, okay? On the y-axis, we have a percentage from 0 to 100, which indicates what is the percentage of people that have reached this particular level of education, whether it's none, grade 1, or all the way to master's degree. Are you with me? Okay. Now, in the legend, you have different colors. You have 7 colors that represent different age groups. The orange one is 20 to 24, the blue one is 30 to 34, and so forth. It goes to yellow, to 80 to 84. And we will start with the yellow one. So, actually you can't really see it, or I can't rather point, but you see here this figure, 40, it says 40%. So this means that in the age group 80 to 84, percentage of people who have reached grade 1 is 40%. Now let's still stay with grade 1 and go to the age group 20 to 21, 20 to 24, the orange graph. You see it here. The percentage is 91%. So this means that in terms of access to education, the country has, over the period of 60 years, jumped by 51 percentage point in terms of making sure that people have access to basic education. And if you look at the graphs as we go towards grade 12 and further into postgraduate degrees, obviously the trend kind of levels out and then goes down. But bottom line here is that in terms of access to education, the government has delivered on its commitment at independence to make sure that in terms of primary education, majority of the people are catered for. The challenge, of course, with this graph starts somewhere here from grade 10, and you see a steep drop, and particularly towards the postgraduate degrees, where we see that in all age categories, we see a steep decline. So this is something that speaks to the issues of quality, but in terms of access, a lot has been done, and this is the key message of this graph. It is a positive one. There is a strong foundation to build on. Further on the issue of access to education, this is a much simpler graph, which talks about how many schools the country has built over the last 10 years. So from 2010, when the country had 1,697 schools, to 2019, this year, 1,897. So a growth of 11 percentage points. The data is available per region, and the region that has grown most when it comes to the increase in the number of schools is Kunene region. So again, something to be proud and to congratulate the government for. More good news in terms of access to education. We see here for the period from 1992 to 2015, I didn't have time to include the last 4 years, but the trend holds. You see here enrollment rates per year and gender from 92 to 2015. And you see a very nice graph that there is almost complete concordance between the males and females. So there is gender parity in terms of access to education from 92 to to date. And there is also a steady increase in the number of learners who are accessing education. So these different angles or these different data points point to the same conclusion, that in terms of access, the country is doing really well. How about expenditure? So this graph, thank you. This graph talks about percentage of total government expenditure comparing Namibia to 114 countries globally. Every dot represents a country. On the x-axis, we have GDP per capita, and on the y-axis, we have percentage of government spending on education. The big black dot that you see here is Namibia. So if you can see, it is among top 3 countries in the world when it comes to expenditure. I think this is a conclusion that is not new to you. We know that the country really does spend a lot, but I think the implied information here is there is very little fiscal room for the country to increase expenditure in education. So it's not so much about lobbying for more money from the national budget, it is looking at technical and allocative efficiency. In other words, what happens to the money, how does it flow to the schools? So both a good news and a calling to make sure that there is accountability in the way the money is being spent. Further, in terms of education expenditure, here you see a graph that visually represents how much money is being spent on primary education in blue, on secondary education in red, and on tertiary education in green for these various years, from 2005 to 2014. What you can see here, that the bulk of the money goes to primary education, which is not surprising because most of the learners are there. However, if you look at the pattern there in terms of the figures, I'm not sure if you can read the actual numbers, but I hope visually you can at least get a sense. There isn't a clear pattern, which is indicative of a lack of a planned approach to allocation of funding among these 3 different phases between primary, secondary, and tertiary. Now, this same data has been analyzed in a slightly different way per capita to see how much money goes in terms of spending for a student in tertiary education, secondary, primary learner, and pre-primary. What we see is that we spend about, or rather the country spends around 56,000 Namibian dollars for a tertiary student, like at UNAM, for example, around 15 or 14,000 in secondary and primary, and only about 4,000 in pre-primary. Now, we can argue whether or not these figures are justifiable, but in any case, if you see a 12-fold difference between spending on pre-primary and tertiary, it certainly merits looking into. If I now share with you the spending in ECD, which is even less, it currently stands at 294. So this is why we talk about this inverted pyramid, which begs us to ask the question, are we investing at the right level of education? And are we really surprised then that when we have learners who have progressed through the schooling cycle and made it to tertiary, oftentimes lecturers still find the need to have to go back and explain some basic concepts because perhaps something was missed in the early and foundational stages of learning. Further to this, also just to share with you an interesting piece that is coming out of this school readiness study, which says that in the 5 regions of Namibia where the school readiness study was conducted in 2019, 44% of children in pre-primary phase, so children who are already in pre-primary phase, have no books at home. So again, in terms of the values and the understanding and the sensitivities around the importance of early learning, early and foundational stage, this particular piece of information begs our collective attention. Now, in my view, what directly stems from this is this following graph, where you see enrollment by year and grade from 2011 to 2015. On the left side of the graph, you see enrollment in grade 1, which stands at roughly around 80,000, approximately between 70 and 80,000, from 2011 to 2015. And as we move through the schooling cycle, you see that there is a drop. There is then a peak in grade 8 and then a steep drop in senior secondary. So we go from 80,000 in grade 1 to 20,000 in grade 12. Again, I'm sure this is not a surprising thing for you. high attrition rates. I have to make one caveat here. These are what we call pseudo-survival rates. In Namibia, we do not have individual learner tracking system, but you can see the trends year in, year out are very stable. And statistically speaking, this points to something very real on the ground, which is the fact that we are losing a lot of our learners as they are progressing through the schooling cycle. Now, we are not saying that all of them need to become engineers, doctors, and lawyers, but certainly we also don't wish to see 2/3 of our learners drop out or not make it to grade 12. This same information is here broken down into 4 different categories of remoteness. So in Namibia, we have 4 categories of remoteness when it comes to schools. Category 1 school, Category 1 school is your school deep in, let's say, Kavango East, where even a 4x4 find it difficult to reach. And the Category 4 school is your school, maybe Windhoek High, somewhere in the central areas of Windhoek. You see very different patterns. Of course, the global trend you can see in all graphs is one of progressive attrition, but in remote schools, it goes all the way to almost 0%, while in Category 4 schools, it levels out around 54%. So in terms of rural and urban disparities, if you're a child born in a remote school, you are much less likely to finish grade 12. Again, not surprising, but I think it's good to have data to back it up so that we can relook at our planning and programming in education. At this stage, I am aware that I ran out of time, so I stand to be guided. To which extent would you like me to go on? How many more slides, or should I wrap up? Professor? How many more minutes? 5 more minutes, okay. So this means 3 more slides and then I will wrap up. Okay, I'm really happy I was given some extra time, because this is a slide that I think points to some systemic challenges that our learners are facing. So the Global Student-Based Health Survey aims to canvass health and safety risks that learners are facing in schools. So here you see that when it comes to alcohol and drug abuse, the percentage of students who have had alcohol once or more times in the last 30 days on the day when this survey was taken stands at around 33%. So 1/3 of our learners are consuming alcohol. In terms of sexual behaviors that contribute to HIV infection and unintended pregnancies, among students who had sexual intercourse during the past 12 months, the percentage of those who used a condom stands at a little below 50%, 47.6%. This implies that the other half, more than half, have not used a condom. And I don't need to tell you what that means in terms of risks of STDs and learner pregnancies. In terms of unintentional injuries and violence, percentage of students who were bullied on 1 or more days in the last 30 days stands at around 52%. Bullying is consistently coming out in all the studies that all the actors in the education fraternity conduct as the single most influential safety risk that learners are facing, and it is directly linked to what for me personally is the saddest part of the statistics, which is mental health. 20.5% of learners considered attempting suicide, and 25.9% had attempted suicide 1 or more times, according to this survey. Now, if I ask you, if you look at this, you know, in my language we say trouble never comes alone. So obviously, if you look at these statistics here, there is a great compound risk that one child, let's say our Ndapandula, will be facing 2 or 3 of these risks simultaneously. I think this presents a very formidable challenge in terms of her education. Now, if I ask you, what do you think, what is the age group of the boys and girls that were canvassed in this study? What would you say? 18, adolescents? Okay, that was my guess too. Well, these are girls and boys aged 13 to 15. So these are really children. And they are facing some formidable challenges when it comes to their safety and well-being at the school level. Hence, school health and school safety. I won't elaborate more on that, but as UNICEF, we feel that it is paramount that tertiary institutions take these statistics into account to make sure that these realities are in one way or another reflected in the curriculum and in the programs that tertiary institutions have when it comes to training our teachers and making sure that they are ready when they go to the schools. And I know that there is a lot of contact between the Ministry of Basic Education and UNAM and other tertiary institutions. Programs are already in place, school health being one of them. Okay, very quickly, distribution of schools per region, on to more lighter topics. So this is a very interesting direction that the ministry is taking in terms of what we call geo-enabling EMIS. In other words, having spatial distribution of schools and understanding where is it that our schools are. Again, unsurprisingly, the bulk of our schools are in the northern regions where the population is. Now, beyond just having this nice little graph, what this kind of analysis affords us is to do all kinds of linkages. Where are the schools in relation to ECD centers? Where are the schools in relation to clinics, to primary or secondary healthcare institutions, so that we can make sure that service delivery is indeed integrated. This slide I will skip in the interest of time. I will conclude with this slide that says, I mentioned this study on socio-economic influences on educational outcomes in Namibia. Again, to me, being the nerd that I am, it's just fascinating that we can really actually link these things together. We have here on the x-axis learner socio-economic status, SES, measured in certain index points from -2 to 2, -2 being the lowest, +2 being the highest. Never mind now the little details. And on the y-axis, we have the SOCIO-ECONOMIC reading scores. And what you see here, I think, even if you have just a basic understanding of how graphs work, is that the socioeconomic status is a very strong predictor of reading. And this holds true for SOCIO-ECONOMIC 1, SOCIO-ECONOMIC 2, 3, and 4, so from 1995 to 2014 when the last SOCIO-ECONOMIC was administered. Okay, I already mentioned this. The way forward. What we propose, one of the way forward, is that we should really engage with data in a serious way. To do that, we must make sure that the data speaks the same language, because we have various data collection endeavors in the various parts of the education sector, also in the basic education, in the higher education, but they don't necessarily speak the same language. This means that they cannot be analyzed together, and that this also means that in terms of equity, we are losing some learners because they are just not in the picture. So data must speak the same language is the first principle. The second one is that data must speak to decision makers. So truly, our decision makers from the highest level down to the school level and ECD center level must engage with data. And there is a program as part of social accountability that aims to translate this data in a way that would speak to decision makers. But perhaps most importantly, data must speak to communities. So we must really make an effort to make sure that all of this information diffuses to communities, so that instead of playing the blame game, we actually approach education and have an approach to quality education as our shared responsibility. And I thank you very much.
Now, I think you can concur with me that the reason why I did not give the CV is because I know at the end you are going to know what kind of a person we have. It's a specialist indeed. Let's give him another round of applause. Thank you very much. I have a chronometer with me. I noted very carefully that we started 2:15. So therefore, when we go on the breakaway session, please add 10 minutes to your time. We shall have about roughly 10 minutes. We are almost 5 minutes to 3 o'clock. We will have 10 minutes for reflections, questions, and answers. I think you will understand that the systems approach that he adopted was able to dissect the data and come up with information and challenges that challenges you and I as educators, what we are going to do in the schools that we have. I think we are in the right direction. He has done quite a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to have 4 colleagues who want to ask questions, make reflections, but let me reserve reflections and statements for tomorrow, or this evening when we go for dinner. Only questions, short and sound and straightforward. Thank you very much. I'll take the first 4. I have 1, 2, this side, 3, only 3. Do we have others that wants to ask? 3, only. 4, the 4th one is there. We have 4 questions. There will be no any other round. Because I know the rest will be our interaction tonight at dinner. Let me start with this side. Yes, sir. May you say your name? Can you have the roving mic? Just introduce yourself and go to your question straight.
All right. Good afternoon. I am Mr. Irwako from Concordia College. I have 4 questions. Number 1.
Just from the beginning.
Yes. Yes.
Let's use what we normally do as educator, prioritization. If you were to be given 1 minute, which question would you ask?
Okay, it will be this one.
1.
Okay, yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. No, well
the other
noted.
one we can intersect later.
Okay. It would be, thank you very much for a very informative data interpretation. I wanted to find out, is there a provision by UNESCO in the issue of interpretation of this data at grassroots level in a way that will garner support from school level and community, instead of getting what we saw with the Educational Act, where there was a backlash and a heated debate in Parliament, so that we do away with some of these backlashes. So is there provision by UNESCO in engaging the relevant stakeholders in the interpretation of this data at grassroots level to garner support and not necessarily backlash?
Thank you very much. Direct question. The next colleague behind you.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I have one question. It's impressive how the data you did and the interpretation. But my question is, to what extent is UNICEF facilitating the utilization or application of the data to inform interventions in terms of 3-pronged approach? That's 1, policy guidance, technical assistance, and capacity building in the context of the SDGs, particularly Goal 4 of the SDGs.
Thank you very much. You got the questions there. We'll move the other direction for the last 2 questions. While he's still moving to the next participant ask the question, I just want to repeat my instructions. Question, straightforward. No statements. Thank you very much.
The presenter mentioned that we are data rich, but that we have an extreme irrational fear of data. I don't know, this uncommon phobia, can you please explain how it, presents itself in the education sector and how it is impacting on our policy making and decision making? Second one, can you elaborate on how data should speak to the communities? Thank you very much. Sorry, doctor. The second one sneaked through,
Okay, I understand. You're a senior citizen. Thank you very much. Let's move, ladies and gentlemen.
Right. I'm Anita Kraft from Morrison Special School, one of the resource schools. I'm a data freak myself. I would like to know, looking at the census and data, with the many impairments and people with disabilities, where do we fall in? How is that relationship? Because with all the data, it's not inclusive. And what can be done to change that approach?
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of the questions. This is exactly 3 o'clock. We'll give our presenter 5 to 10 minutes, particularly 5 minutes to answer those questions. Then we can move the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, colleagues, for these extremely relevant questions. So I'll try to be quick and concise, starting with the colleague from Concordia College. Yes, absolutely. There is provision for grassroots engagement through the Data Must Speak program. UNICEF's mandate is to support the government. So we are not there to drive that process. We are there to provide capacity building, support in policy formulation, and technical support, as was said by the second speaker, actually. So in terms of policy development, UNICEF supported the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture in formulating, for the first time, a dedicated policy on EMIS. So all this amazingly rich data has been operating in a policy vacuum since 1992. This year, hopefully before the year ends, the ministry will propose to the cabinet a fully fledged, dedicated EMIS policy, which has 8 goals, and each goal has sub-goals. But the first goal is data use, and within that goal, the policy goes into great detail in explaining how the ministry can engage school level and community level stakeholders. I regret not having time to share with you concrete examples from the social accountability program, but I know that there is a director here from Oshana region who is one of the pioneering regions when it comes to social accountability. So Meme Hileni, please help me out here during coffee breaks to attest to the fact that this program is really taking root on the ground. In Hardap, in Ohangwena, in Oshana, since 2 weeks ago in Kunene, and the ministry's approach is to progressively scale up this program, which has a very robust methodology on engaging with communities on issues of data in all the 14 regions. So I hope that answers the second question as well, to which extent UNICEF is facilitating this process. So yes, in terms of technical support, we have supported the ministry to build a customized web-based platform. So in plain English, to use IT to make sure that the data are collected in time, that the data are reliable, and that they are reaching the different levels of audience, from the decision makers at the national and regional level to circuit level officials, inspectors, principals, but most importantly, data is born at the school level and data must go back to the school level. So this is the core orientation of the ministry with the support of the UN to make sure that there are these data flows and that we are not just harvesting data from the people, but that we actually go back to them. To the director of Mighty Karas region, sir, I'm not a cognitive psychologist, so I can't explain the origin of phobia, but what I can tell you is that the Data Must Speak program really aims to remove fear and to demystify the issue of data. The trainings that we have conducted since July 2018 to date were done precisely with a view to remove fear and hopefully also phobia around the issue of data. And I think the education sector really is a leader when it comes to data use. This is not my opinion, this is the opinion of the National Statistics Agency, which officially said that EMIS, with all the challenges that it's facing, is the most robust management information system in the country. The last question, very close to my heart. Thank you, Madam, the principal from the Morrison Special School. Yes, in the EMIS report currently, yes, we have a chapter. The last chapter speaks about the data of children with special learning needs and with disabilities. But the challenge there is that teachers are not qualified to diagnose. You know better than anyone that these problems require high level of expertise. So what the government is doing through the Integrated School Health Program and the School Safety Framework is to, for starters, sensitize people and sensitize stakeholders in education around the importance of including children with disabilities when we do data collection. The support is needed from the Ministry of Health and other line ministries who are more specialized to provide correct diagnostic information. So I have to say the data that is provided in EMIS on disabilities in the country should be taken with a grain of salt. They are indicative because they were not diagnosed properly by a qualified personnel, but they are mainly indicative. It's what teachers are picking up. But even so, this is still a valuable clue. It's a valuable hint that gives us at least a sense to the extent of the problem, so that the ministry can take that forward in terms of planning and making sure that indeed no child is left behind in the long run. I hope I answered your questions satisfactorily. Thank you.
Exactly 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I should be guided. I should call the dean to do some bit of rituals. I hope so. Educational rituals.
Unfortunately, there are no rituals. Well, thank you very much. I think a big round of applause for this session. Thank you, Prof. Likando and Dr. Eleni Kapenda for being the rapporteur. So you still have your function that you have to play on later in the day. Maybe I'll just announce very quickly that when we go into the group sessions, we will have exactly an hour. So meaning that we have to reconvene for tea and coffee, maybe at 16:15. So please make use of the hour as best as you can. I think Marika wanted to just give a little introduction of what are the expectations. I think the group sessions, please people, are really probably the most important, because this is where you are going to give your inputs that will guide us. How do we have to redesign our teacher education programs for effective implementation and for improving teaching and learning in the classrooms? So you're going to have to make those big contributions in the breakaway sessions. So thank you, Marika.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. I think the Dean said it very nicely. We have had the opportunity to listen to wonderful presentations, but because our aim is to harvest the ideas, also our own reflections through the breakout sessions, this is the time to do that. And how we are going to do it is we are going to divide ourselves into 3 groups. So according to the teacher training phase that you are responsible for, or you can contribute the most. We have the ECD and junior primary group that will meet in QICEP 2. So that would be moving from that door, going to the right, it's the next door. Then we have the senior primary and junior secondary group. And you would need to go with your chair and scribe. You can go this way and then turn to your left. It's again, QICEP 3 is the next door if you follow that corridor. And then the biggest group that we have is the senior secondary group, and you will remain in this venue. So stay here or move to the 2 other venues depending on the phase of teacher training that you are responsible for. We have provided for each group some guideline which the people who have been assigned to facilitate the sessions will then help you through. So please, let's move to the groups, and you will have 30 minutes per theme in the group session.
There are 3 USB sticks with the data if they want for the 3 groups.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah. Just to add, as I promised, the USB sticks for each of the 3 groups are here. So I will just hand them over to the rapporteurs or chiefs of every group if you need them for your deliberations.
How was it? It's beautiful.
Yeah?
I need that data as well.
Okay.
It's really beautiful.
I'll be happy to share it with you.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you so much.
We may move, ladies and gentlemen.